Hi, everyone. Welcome to Life Mastery TV, your source for inspiration, empowerment, and fulfillment. My name is David McLeod. I am your Life Mastery coach and author of the book, A Life to Die For. This is episode 166, Transformational Conversations with Grief. There are very few experiences in life that can shake your foundations and move you off center more than the loss of a loved one. And the loss can be just as painful or difficult, whether it is through death or divorce or just the end of a relationship. Sometimes the experience can be so intense that it actually shatters your faith in yourself, in the world, or even in God. Sooner or later, though, everyone suffers losses in relationships, career, finances, health, or wellness. And every loss seems to come with its own array of challenging responses like sadness, loneliness, anger, grief, perhaps an uncertainty about what the future might hold for you. So even though the loss can be painful to deal with as it is happening, it inevitably provides an opportunity for you to create something beautiful and meaningful out of the experience. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. To help us with that, I've invited another wonderful healer to share her perspective on grief and loss and to provide some tools to help us deal with it when it shows up. My guest helps men and women experiencing major life transitions in career, health, or relationships to consciously create the life they want to live on the other side of change. She is a professional certified coach with certifications in grief counseling, mentor coaching, relationship, and divorce coaching. Please welcome my friend, the lovely Carrie to our program today. Carrie, I hope you're there. I see you're in on the audio. Are you there on the video?
Yes, I'm working on trying to connect here. Internet seems to be crawling at a snail's pace today. So I think I will pop up there pretty soon, but thank you, David. Thank you for that introduction. It's great to be here on your show.
Yeah, well, even if you can't come on camera, it's great to have you here. I mean, people might have to look at me for a while, and okay, if you can come on camera, just come on whenever you can, and we'll just have our conversation this way.
Yeah.
I know people love to see you just as much as I do, so.
Well, I'd love to be on camera as well. I keep clicking it and it's not responding to me, so I will just keep doing that. Okay. And we'll just continue our conversation this way if we have to.
Sure, that's great. So first of all, I just want to say I'm really thrilled that you're able to join me today. I know I had the pleasure of meeting you in person at Soul Treat back, I guess it was past November, a year ago, November, wasn't it?
Yeah, so long. Yeah,
I know. But that was a wonderful experience, and I got to be present for your workshop, which had to do with a topic that's very similar to what we're discussing today. And I guess the way I'd like to start this, if it's okay with you, I'm kind of curious. I know that you've been helping people deal with grief and sorrow and loss for a long time now, and I'm wondering if you'd like to share a little bit about what happened in your life that led you onto this particular path.
Yeah, I'd love to share about that. I was I'll go back a little bit because part of what really spurred me on into curiosity and self-development and learning more about myself was my divorce some 20 years ago. And that got me into a master's degree program in spiritual psychology and with an emphasis in counseling psychology. And it was my intention to become a marriage and family therapist. And I got into my internship from that program, and I really decided that just wasn't the path for me. I then got into higher education, and I was working in a leadership role in higher education. And then I found out about coaching, and I was really intrigued by the whole coaching model. I went to a coach training program. And then as I was completing the program, my mother died kind of suddenly. And at the same time as that happening, we were asked to choose a specialization to serve clients in for our coaching. And as I was processing the grief of losing my mother, it was a really devastating time for me. It awakened in me a real call to serve those people who are struggling with grief, with loss. And I found that there were just so many ways that people were even supported in doing it that were helpful, but they were kind of slow in accelerating somebody through the grieving process. So I really got curious about how would one do that? And I created a 9-step process for rebuilding your life after loss. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, I mean, I've been through a couple of divorces myself, so I know how challenging and painful they can be. Um, that it sounded like that kind of, oh, there you are. Hey,
there I
am. You made it.
Finally, it cooperated.
That's great. So it sounded like your divorce really was something that was it wasn't quite as painful for you as the loss of your mother. Is that correct? Or did I misunderstand that?
Well, no, it was at that point in my life, David, it was the most painful thing I'd ever gone through. And that sort of spurred me into finding out more about myself so that I would never have to go through that again. And then it was just this progression of other losses, other things that really knocked me flat, that really got ignited inside of me that calling to serve. But absolutely, the divorce was very painful.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I'm not sure what the circumstances were for your divorce, but I know in my case, the what happened for me in my first divorce was that I had come to a realization that I was really a pretty angry and resentful person, and I wasn't sure how I got there or what was going on, and I tried looking for some support to help me with that, and I couldn't find it anywhere in where I lived in Canada at the time. And I came to this conclusion that my only option was to leave. It was so I was the one who created the divorce. I left my family. I left my wife. I left pretty much everything in the city of Edmonton. Gave up my PhD program at the University of Alberta, and then headed off to a job in Silicon Valley, which there was a lot of pain and depression and a lot of the dark emotions. I even got kind of suicidal at one point. And the only thing that kept me from doing that was the thought of leaving my children without a father, entirely without a father. Not that I was present in their lives anyway, but I knew I had to do something. And that situation brought me in touch with all kinds of people and teachings and opportunities to learn and grow and develop myself, that I was able to reconnect with my children. I mean, the divorce remained continuous, and I feel bad in some sense about how that came about, but I didn't have the same sense of devastation or loss that I think that you're describing. And I'm trying to imagine in my life, where have I had that? Where have I had that kind of sense of loss? And so for me, this is a new journey today.
Well, good.
So
Well, and grief is a natural response to loss, and the intensity of the grief that you feel will depend on a bunch of factors. If it's a person that you lost, it'll depend on the importance of that relationship in your life, or the thing that was lost. If it was a career or your health or something, how important it is to you is one of the factors of how deep the grief process will go. And often people experience multiple losses, one after another. Like, okay, their cat dies, and then their grandmother dies, and then their parents die, and then they get a divorce, like all within the course of a year or even 2 years. All of those can kind of stack up and create an even kind of deeper hole that people fall into. And the number also of what we call secondary losses that are attached to this one that you're going through. So like, for instance, you are going through a divorce. You may have to sell the house. You may have to move to a whole different neighborhood. You may lose friends. You may lose the relationship that you had with your in-laws. So there's secondary losses that go with a divorce as well, financial losses as well. And also the state of a person's physical and mental health while they're going through the grieving process. Their capacity for resilience also is a big factor. And a big, big factor is the quality of support that people receive. And you mentioned, David, when you were going through your divorce, there really wasn't much in the way of support. You could go to see a therapist, perhaps, perhaps there were support groups, but the quality of support that you receive when you're grieving is a huge also factor on how well you will grieve.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that. And I think that there's another, before I go any further on the conversation, I just want to invite the folks who are here on the live presentation. Thank you for joining us live. I really appreciate that you're here. If you want to interact with us, please just, put something into the text or whatever, and then we will respond as we can as we proceed. So feel free to throw your thoughts out there and share them with us, because we do want to have some interaction here. So what I think I was going to say, Carrie, is that I think when I hear people talk about this pain, I think I've had my own experience of loss, but the pain has never gotten so great that it disabled me, or it kept me from doing the things that I thought I needed to be doing in my life. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, I guess I'm not able to fully resonate with that level of pain that people talk about. And I want to understand more about that. Does that mean that I'm broken or something?
No, everyone grieves in their own way, David. And in a way, I don't like to make generalizations, but men seem to be what we call instrumental grievers. So if they're feeling pain and loss and sadness, they'll want to do something to, either redirect them into something that feels more life affirming, or to distract them, or to get it, if they get a divorce, often they will get right into a next relationship because they want to do something about these feelings of loneliness that they have.
Interesting.
Yeah. So men tend to be more instrumental grievers. It's not like always like that, but it's often like that. And grief is an individual process. We all grieve differently, and we all grieve different losses differently. So I wouldn't say you're broken, David. It's just...
Well, thank you for that. Just to be fair here and to be totally vulnerable and honest, I have experienced a couple of occasions in my life when I did feel that deep sense of loss, that deep sense, that hole that seemed suddenly there that I couldn't quite fill. And in both cases, it had to do with my father. And like when I was 9 years old, my mom and my dad, they got divorced. And then my father was pretty much out of my life for the next 20 years or so. And when I reconnected with him, even that was kind of a shallow thing. And it wasn't until I was close to 50 years old that we finally managed to find a heart connection. And then shortly after that, within a couple of maybe 6 months, he died. And it was that point, I really did feel a lot of sadness and loss for that. I thought, wow, here we are just getting connected, and there he goes again. And it was kind of painful. So I guess I do resonate or relate in some degree to the pain side of things. But I think I agree with you that I tend to be, let me just go do something and maybe distract myself from what I'm feeling, and it'll just go away. I think there's some truth to that too.
Yeah. Also, attachment theory has a lot to do with how grief affects us. And just to say a very little bit about that, the our primary relationships are with our parents. And so we learn and we are conditioned into certain attachments. So if you have a secured attachment with your parents, say you know you're loved, you know that you're going to be safe and taken care of, that's one kind of an attachment. Another kind of an attachment is an anxious and ambivalent kind of attachment where you're not quite sure. It's like your parents are taking care of you and paying attention to you one minute and the next they're not. And as a child, that's very confusing. We don't really know how to deal with that kind of ambiguity in the relationship. So we form a different kind of attachment than if we had a secure attachment where we just knew, hey, my parents love me, they're there for me. And so they say that people with an anxious, ambivalent attachment style, especially with their parents, they tend to grieve. The grief can even sometimes turn into a depression, because what happens is, and this happened to me, David, it was one of those where I had an anxious, ambivalent attachment to my mother. And when she died, and she died suddenly, it was like inside of me, I was left with this question. How am I ever going to get the love that I had been searching for from her? She's gone now. I'm not going to get that. And so I think that was also part of the pain of her passing. I was just knowing you're not going to get that love that you've been trying to get all those years by behaving well and doing all the right things. And yeah.
The irony here is, I'm not trying to make flip or to be flip about this, but you weren't getting it anyway, and now there's a certainty that you're not going to get it.
But you can try.
Yeah, that itself, that certainty must have an impact on you. Suddenly realizing, wow, all this stuff that I've been trying to get from my mom for all these years, I'm definitely not going to get it now.
Well, and later on in the process, that was where my freedom came from.
Yeah.
But initially, it was a blow.
Right. Yeah, I saw that Ajar, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, is interested in learning about how to support someone who has had a loss. Definitely, we are going to be talking about that, Ajar. We'll get to that probably towards the latter part of the conversation, but I just want to let you know that we're not gonna skip past that. That's on my list of notes. So thank you for pointing that out. And so we've been talking a lot about the nature of grief and how it shows up. And of course, as you say, grief is going to be different for everyone. Well, I mean, I guess it's like saying anger is different for everyone, really.
Sure.
I guess when I see someone behaving a certain way, I can usually associate and say, that looks like anger acting out to me. I can see that. And when I see someone crying and moaning and, whatever, I can, that person is sad or unhappy or suffering from some grief. So we associate behaviors with words, and that still doesn't mean that we're talking about the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So is there like a short definition that we could apply that helps people understand what we really mean by the word grief?
Well, grief affects us on all levels: physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and socially. Again, depending on the nature of the loss and how deeply connected you were to that person when they left, it's going to have a physical effects for people. A lot of people feel really just exhausted. They stop taking care of themselves sometimes. So it's like a compounding issue. They may gain weight, lose weight. They mentally, you hear people going into a mental fog. It's like their capacity for focus and for really staying with a subject seems to be marred, and they're just really focused on their thoughts about the loss and what that means to them. Emotionally, of course, you're going to feel all kinds of emotions. You're going to feel sadness, anger, regret, bitterness. It's all over the place. Spiritually, some people go into a deep questioning of, why did God take this person from me? Is there a God? A loving God wouldn't do this, so it can sometimes really question people's faith. Socially, people tend to isolate and withdraw if they feel like their friends don't understand them or feel awkward around them. And also, people do, depending on who they are, people do tend to kind of pull away from someone who is deeply grieving. And so what you'll notice, yeah, it feels uncomfortable to them, because then they feel like, oh, I've got to fix this. I've got to make them feel better. And guess what? If I'm grieving and I'm talking to you, you can't fix these feelings. These are feelings, feelings can't be fixed. Or I could go into a whole thing about dealing with emotions. Feelings really just need to be heard, to be expressed, and then released. They don't need to be fixed. They don't need to be, managed. So they don't even need to be healed. They just need to be able to be felt, honored, and then they tend to move through.
Right. Well, you've covered a lot in that little section there. One thing I do want to come back to, though, is this notion of the spiritual aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Because I believe that how you respond spiritually is going to depend upon your belief systems to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you have a belief system that's mired in some kind of religious dogma, then you may indeed go through some of the challenges that you've already described. But if your spirituality is more, maybe, let's say, more Buddhist in nature, or more non-religious, where it's really a kind of an inclusive connectedness with all things, I think that your response might tend to be a little bit different. And I know that's been true in my life. My idea of spirituality, I don't believe in God in the traditional Christian sense, even though that's how I was brought up. I believe in a supreme consciousness that it really is an envelopment and a connection of all of who we are, all of us. And so when one person, someone even that I'm close to and that I love, moves on to another plane, that's how I see it. I don't see it so much as, oh man, now I'm all alone. Because I know that really I'm not all alone, even though my mind, my ego mind, which loves to stay in fear-based thinking, it will tell me I'm alone. But the truth is I'm never alone, because I'm always connected to this thing all around. Now, not everybody's going to agree with that kind of a spirituality, but I know it's been very helpful for me. Whenever anything unpleasant happens, it doesn't matter. I can come back to that place of groundedness and know that I am one with all that is. So it's all good.
Yeah. Let me tell you of a story of a client I worked with. She, it was a second marriage for him and a first marriage for her. And she was quite a bit younger than her husband. They had a child together. They had 2 children together. And then he suddenly got diagnosed with one of the cancers. I can't, and he went very quickly. And she was a very, I would say, spiritually conscious, and as was he. They had a spiritual life that was very nourishing for them, that really fed them in a lot of ways. And they didn't go to church in a defined religion, but I think that she even also followed Buddhist practices and things like that. When he died, even though they knew that he was ill, and they didn't really feel that they had had enough time to prepare for that, the emotional side that somebody goes through when their life partner is no longer there to raise the children, to make big life decisions, to you know, help with chores, to help with the finances, you definitely can feel abandoned. And that can get projected onto your relationship with God or your universal concept. You just start to feel like, you know, the whole universe has abandoned you. And it's just based on that sort of feeling sense of that acute grief. And it takes some time to work through that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I totally get it. I totally agree with it.
Yeah.
And yes, and we are still here on a physical plane, and we still have to deal with all the things, all the situations, all the events, and everything else that exist here on this plane. No matter how elevated our consciousness might be, that fact doesn't change. So you're absolutely right. I think that you know, it's easy to well, I shouldn't say it's not that you're falling out of spirituality. It's just that the overwhelm of the physical world might make it harder to stay connected to that spiritual nature. That's how I see it.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, I mean, we all are going to be challenged by certain things, and I'm not telling you that I'm so elevated that I don't get challenged. Please don't mistake me. I'm still a human being. I still have all the same challenges that everybody else has.
And yeah, you're raising a really excellent point, because grief, it may feel bad, but grief is not in itself a bad experience. You know,
Right.
it has gifts, you know, that we can receive once we're ready to open them. But there's a process that people go through when they are processing through a grief. This same client a year later published a book that she had written. She had kept a journal of her process, her thoughts, and she published a book afterwards that was deeply intimate, deeply healing for her, and also helpful for others, because it was real. She talked about her process day by day. You know, those days where she opens the fridge and she sees the bottle of beer, and it's 9 a.m. and she's very tempted, you know, that it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But there are gifts in our grief. And when I work with people and they are starting to heal or starting to work or adapt to their losses, let's just put it that way, they usually turn around and say, you know, I want to help other people who have gone through something like this. This turned me into a better person. It made me more compassionate. It broke my heart open. And from that open-hearted place, I was able to see differently. I was able to see into the hearts of people who are suffering and have compassion for them, because I was able to give compassion to myself. And so when we reach that kind of a experience after grieving, that is one of the transformational opportunities of grief.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And if you think about it for a minute, it sounds like, I mean, the way I'm hearing you, this is really what life is all about. Every experience that we have gives us an opportunity to learn something more about who we are and how we show up in the world. And I've heard it said that if I don't learn from the experience now, I'm going to get another chance a little bit later to try again. Because the universe is going to keep providing me opportunities to learn until I really understand the truth of who I really am. And maybe having these experiences of loss are there, and one of the gifts that we can get out of it is to understand that even though a loved one, let's say, has left our life, while they were here, there were some great gifts there, and I can benefit from those gifts, and I always have the memory of that person or whatever the situation is. I have the memories of all those gifts, and I can always conjure that person in my life, you know, spiritually, through prayer and through other mechanisms. So yeah, we're never actually disconnected. It just, we've gone through a transition in the way we communicate with one another. I don't see your physical face or your physical body or I don't get to wrap my arms around you and have the experience of a hug. But I do get to feel your presence in my heart. And maybe I get to feel your presence in my heart in a much bigger way than I ever did when we were together.
Yeah.
So all those things that we can learn from as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is one of the steps in my process, is reframing the relationship. So, exactly as you're saying, we really look at the nature of relationships, and relationships live inside of us. How we relate to a person is based on how we relate to ourselves sometimes. But those important people in our lives, they do live in our hearts. And so learning to connect to them so that you can feel their presence. Many people talk about feeling the presence of their loved one.
Right.
And, it used to be said that when people would say that, like in a therapy session or something, they would be diagnosed as not sufficiently right, not sufficiently moving on,
Right.
But that has since been set aside, and people in the grief counseling professions recognize this is such an important part of the resilience, the part of rebuilding your life after this loss, because you do need to have that sense of connection to that person, whether they're gone or not. But it's not something that you would want to try to build in someone until they're ready.
Yeah.
When they're really craving that intimate, personal, physical connection with the person, and they're not there to, fix the dishwasher anymore or to cook food for us, or, it's like when we're in that real craving of the person. And also when there's especially if it's a spouse, I work a lot with people who have lost a spouse, because it tends to shake up your identity as well. Your roles in life can have to shift around. You may have to take on new responsibilities in the family that you never had to do before, and you're no longer a wife or a husband. So an adjustment to the identity of the person is also part of the process.
Right. Well, you've used a couple of great words throughout this conversation that I think are important. One was adjustment. You just used it now. And another one you used earlier was adapt, or adaptation.
Yeah.
And that's really what I see us doing here.
Mm-hmm.
We'll come to that in a second, but I wanted to just touch on what you said about feeling the presence. I don't know, when you were talking, it reminded me of, I don't know how many movies I've ever seen where somebody has a wife or a husband die, and they are trying to deal with their grief while other stuff is going on around them. And you see them having conversations with this person as if he or she is right there in the room. And then a third person walks along and hears the conversation and steps in, who you're talking to. So for some people, it's very real like that. Like there's actually a person in the room and they actually have a conversation with them. I think that's wonderful. I love that image.
Yeah, I have conversations with my mom sometimes.
Right.
It's like, how do you make that meatloaf again?
Right.
What do you think I should do here?
Yeah, and you probably get an answer too.
Yeah, you may not get an answer that you hear audibly. You may get it in a synchronicity in your life.
Right.
A book falls off a shelf, or, there's so many ways that we can feel the presence of a loved one. Because it's been said, sometimes the depth of your grieving is showing you the depth of your love. right? So the love goes on, whether the person is with you or not. And it does take some time to get to this place where you totally embrace that. Because until you are through the part where you really need to create a safe space for yourself to feel all your emotions, to express them, to name them, to make friends with them, to hear what they have to say, and until you get to where you're feeling a little bit on solid ground emotionally, you're kind of not ready for these kinds of approaches in your thoughts.
Right. All right. So I already know what the answer to this question is going to be.
Okay, well, ask away.
But I'm going to ask anyway so that it's on the record. How long am I going to be in this grief state, for God's sake?
Depends. There is no, see, you knew the answer. There's no answer to that question. People, that is one of the biggest questions that I get asked. And it's understandable because we think, oh, if it's just going to be a month, I can deal with it. If this is going to be the rest of my life, I don't think so. So it's not going to be perhaps a month, and it's not going to be the rest of your life. It's going to take as long as it takes for you to do what we call the tasks of mourning, and to adapt to your loss, to learn how to move forward in your life without that person or without that, that thing that was very important to you in your life.
Right. It's so one of the things that I have learned in my life is that there are two kinds of time that we deal with.
Mm-hmm.
The first of those is chronological time, what we call chronos.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that I can tell you I'll be there in 10 minutes. It's going to take 55 minutes to cook this roast. We have a specific amount of time and we know that's pretty accurate. And then there's this other kind of time that you're talking about, which is called Kairos time. And that is, it's however long it takes.
Yeah.
It's like, how long does it take for a flower to bloom? How long does it take for a baby to be born? How long does it take for grief to end? See, these are all questions that come up with the same answer. It takes the time that it takes. And there is
research. There's research that's been done into this. And if you take the approach of time heals all wounds and you just kind of, work your way through it, it can take anywhere from 5 to 8 years to go through these, tasks of mourning and start to feel like you're resilient and sort of back into your life. Again, depending on the type of loss that you're dealing with. And that was why I got really interested in trying to, how would I coach someone to accelerate through their grieving process? Well, it's really honoring each of these tasks of mourning and coming alongside someone and helping them navigate through it. It's not necessarily walking ahead of them or walking behind of them. It's walking with them. That's a huge part of how to, and I think that's a nice segue into how do we support people who are grieving in our lives.
Okay.
One of the things that it's really important to notice about yourself, say you have a friend or a family member who is going through a deep grieving experience, just notice for yourself, how comfortable am I with strong emotions in myself? To the extent that you're comfortable crying or feeling angry and know how to process that, and are friendly with your own emotions, you know how to live your emotional life in a way that is honoring and yet effective, then you're going to be able to also naturally just be with someone who's experiencing strong emotions in a really helpful way. There is just so much that can be done for a person who's grieving if you don't do some of the things that when I'm working with somebody and they tell me what people say to them and they just get furious. So we don't want to do anything that would make their pain worse. And we always have the best of intentions. But you'll hear people say things like, you're young, you'll get married again some way, or I know how you feel. My grandma passed away this year. Pardon?
Yeah, I like to take a baseball bat in that case.
Yeah, but you hear this all the time.
I know.
People say it's been a year now. It's time for you to get over it.
That's right.
He's moved on.
That's a good one
too. Yeah.
That's because let's say I have a friend who's suffered a loss. And because it's not my loss, it's not the same loss, I can be empathetic and I can be supportive. And I have to be very, very careful that I don't say, hey, man, you should be over it by now.
Not only that, your loss has got nothing to do with theirs.
Exactly.
And so many people think, oh, if I offer, my little grief to you, then you'll know that I get it, how you feel. But you don't get it, how they feel. You just don't get it because you're not in their shoes. You're not in their skin. So it's really best to just kind of leave that alone. We don't want to rationalize somebody's pain for them, try to tell them all the reasons why they shouldn't feel that way. Let the person do their own rationalizing.
Exactly.
When they're ready. We don't want to minimize someone's pain. We don't want to make them, feel like they shouldn't feel a certain way. And, all you do then is you just tell people that they don't have a right to their feelings, or that they're not having the correct feelings. And then they just withdraw from you. So you don't want to minimize people's feelings. And again, you don't want to make those erroneous assumptions or comparisons about your loss and their loss, because you don't know how they feel until they tell you. It's based on your, experience. It's irrelevant. And platitudes are just a pain just don't do them. She's in a better place. God needed him more than you do. Just don't do it. It's just that.
Oh my God, that's a horrible thing to say. Yeah.
People say these things.
That's right. Well, and another thing that people do, think about how many wakes or you've seen in the movies where they all arrive bringing tons of food, as if food is going to take the pain away. Mm-hmm. And maybe we have this unconscious belief that if you eat enough, you're not going to think about your feeling. I don't know.
That's just one of the rituals. And I get into talking about rituals and how they can be comforting, and every culture has different rituals, right? For some, it's the wake, and you bring lots of food and drink and you sit and party and talk about the person who left. And for others, so ritual is a very important part of the mourning process, because it is an honoring of that which has been lost, the person who has been lost. But, I've said a few things of what not to do, but I don't want to leave people just with a big list of things not to do. The best thing to do for someone is to just listen to them, to ask them, how are you doing? Don't assume, oh yeah, my husband died 2 months ago. You just say, how are you doing with that? And rather than that obligatory, I'm sorry for your loss, sometimes people take offense to that. Others people don't. But just, I can't imagine what this is like for you. How are you doing? And, also, if someone cries in front of you, this is a moment where all you need to do is just encourage them. Just, it's okay. Let that out. I'm here for you.
And I would like to interrupt here and add something to that.
Sure.
Because one thing I have noticed people do when someone else is crying or feeling some other kind of strong emotion, if I, the other person, am uncomfortable with that, then my tendency might be to put my arm around that person and to try and console them and say, oh, there, don't cry, or whatever. What I'm essentially doing there is projecting my own discomfort onto them. I say don't even touch the person unless they specifically ask for a hug or some kind of support in that way. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that I like to ask people, yeah, I know that especially if it's a close friend who's going through that, and I would just say to them, and what support would you like from me right now?
Wow.
What support would you like from me right now?
And that's so great because and that question can be a nice open-ended question like that can be helpful. And yet at the same time, I worked with a lot of people who they get a lot of this, what can I do for you? And it puts on the person who is grieving sort of the responsibility to come up with the list of things that, I'm talking about like mow the lawn, that kind of thing. A lot of times if you're with somebody and you know them well, you can step in and you could say, hey, how about if I walk the dog? Hey, how about if I take the baby for a while? What if I just mowed your lawn for the rest of the summer? Think of things that, and they could say yes or no, but they experience such relief when just somebody makes a concrete offer, and then obviously, do make good on your commitment.
Right.
But it puts that subtle pressure. Yeah, because then they just go, oh, I don't know,
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily talking about that kind of support.
Yeah.
I was talking more about emotional and spiritual and presence support. Because it's so easy for me to say, well, can I get you a cup of coffee, or can I just? You start throwing out ideas. That's just doing stuff. Mm-hmm. I'd rather avoid saying anything other than, how can I support you right now?
Yeah.
And when I say that, I'm not asking them to tell me to go mow the lawn. I'm not asking them to come up with a list of things. Yeah. Maybe all they want, I might offer, I say, can I give you a hug? Can I share a hug with you? Mm-hmm. Maybe that's not what they want. I don't know. So, and it's okay for them to say no. I want them to understand that. That's why I try to leave it open-ended. So, if they want me to mow the lawn, then I might say yes or no. Now, that's not quite what I had in mind. I got a broken leg here. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm here for emotional support for my good friend who's suffering. What kind of support can I offer you right now?
Yeah.
Can I pray for you? Can I make you some dinner? Can I just be present and just listen? What would you like me to do?
Yeah. When you're in the presence of a person who is crying, who is, in that grief in that moment, you're absolutely right. They're not thinking about, it's like you said, it's really a good idea to let go of any idea that you need to fix them. Just let them be exactly where they are. People also, even unconsciously, by pressing a tissue into somebody's hand who's crying, that's like an unconscious signal. Okay, that's enough. Stop. It's just like if you just sit with somebody when they're done, when the feeling has passed through, and when they're done with their crying, they'll reach for a tissue or they'll ask you for one. But it's really, even just these subtle things can be so important, where you just companion with them and just do your best also to keep your relationship intact with them. So many people just run for the hills because they don't know how to be with that person. So avoiding a grieving person because it's uncomfortable for you, that's really hard for them. And so, just do your best to be there, to not abandon them, or to stay away from them with some idea of, oh, well, she doesn't really want me around right now. Just, keep inquiring, keep in the relationship as much as you can. It's okay to talk about the strangeness of it all. It's okay also for you to cry with them. say it was somebody, a friend, that you were in that relationship with a couple and you were friends with both. It's really okay to cry with them too. So your avoidance is that really is painful.
I think I loved you mentioned about the tissue thing. I've seen that happen too. Generally, when I do work with people, especially group work, I make sure there's tissues all over the place.
Me too.
So people, they know where they are, and I'll even mention that at the beginning of the session.
Yeah.
Tissues are here, 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 and here. If you want them, ask for them, but we're not going to shove them in your face.
Awesome. I'm so glad you do that, David, because that's such an unconscious thing. We think we're, helping them, but we're just subtly just saying that's enough. You're done. Clean yourself up.
The only thing that I might do in a case where you were describing, where I just happened to be in the presence of someone who started crying, I might reach for a box of tissue and put it on the floor beside them or something.
Yeah.
They know where it is. If they want it, they can grab it. But I'm not saying you better use this tissue.
Right. That's a kindness there. Yeah.
Coming out of their nose. Well, that's just part of the process. Let it be.
Well, and I encourage people, when I'm coaching with them and their feelings are present, it's just like, come on, just let it out. It's okay. You don't have to hold on to this. It doesn't have to look pretty. I just tell people, if you're crying, this is good. This is you taking the pain you feel on the inside and bringing it out. And so go for it like it's an Olympic sport. Let the waterworks go.
I'm always careful about phrases that I use. Like, for example, I have had people, when I would tell them, I would say this in my early stages of coaching, if it, go ahead, let it out. If it, scream, yell, whatever. Like, now I'm giving them commands to let it out rather than offering and saying, if it has a voice, then let it speak.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I do it now. If it has a voice, then let it speak in whatever way it chooses to speak.
Yeah.
That way, it's much more inviting. They might say something, they might not.
Mm-hmm.
But they realize they have the freedom and the safety to do it. And that's really what this is all about. So
totally.
Anybody can do this. You don't have to be a professional coach to do it. Just learn a few techniques and just be present for people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like opening your heart to another.
Right.
That's really what it asks for.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you're the one grieving, it's kind of the same idea of partnering with yourself. It's not like you're always going to be with someone who can help you through it. It's really going to be about resourcing your own inner strength, your own inner compassion, your own ability to trust yourself that you are strong and capable and you are divine, and you may be having a grief experience, but this is not who you are.
Bingo. Yeah, I love that. And that's something that I teach constantly. I've heard people say you are the sum of your experiences. And I say, no, that's absolutely not true. Your experiences are just things that happened in your life. You are not those experiences. You are who you are. You are a divine, magnificent spiritual being of light and love who happens to have all these beautiful experiences on this human plane.
Mm.
So thank you for saying that. I agree with you 100%. I wanted to come back to something. I think we've covered a lot of great stuff here already, but there is something I want to cover before we close out. And that is the question of how can I help someone, or how can we help each other detect unprocessed grief? And then once we find it, how do we release it once and for all?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because unprocessed grief, it's pretty much under the radar. And so, how can you tell if you have unprocessed grief? I mean, and I get people, David, who come to me who they just feel like, I haven't cried enough. I think there's something wrong with me. And so we probe into that, and they're concerned that, am I not processing this? And so a lot of times it's like, hey, we're not going to be doing archaeology and looking for stuff that's not there. However, you can tell sometimes the signs of an unprocessed grief. It could show up as like feeling a little stuck in your life, like you're not able to move forward in some ways. It can that feeling of stuckness, like you don't have permission to move forward or something, can get in the way of your relationships or your work. It feels like your life feels a little bit choked off, like you're only living in a few rooms of your house. Okay, others are off limits, and you just don't go in there. And the problem is, those rooms that you're not going into, they contain your joy as well as your sorrow.
Bingo.
So you're living a small, limited version of yourself in your life, and you notice that. So that can be a sign of unprocessed grief. Addictions. There's been a lot of research that many addictions are rooted in unprocessed grief, where, numbing out from feeling the pain becomes a habit, and then the habit becomes a lifestyle, and then the lifestyle becomes a way of life.
Right.
So those are some pretty concrete.
Right. Those are some great things to watch for. All right. So before I got one more thing I want to do before we close out, and that is, let's talk about the great gift that can come out of grief. Obviously, that's going to look different for people, but in general, do you have some description of what the ultimate gift might look like for someone after they reach the end of their grieving process, or even as they're going through their grieving process?
Yeah, you're right. As they're going through it, they can start to see the gifts, and certainly when they feel that they have made the adjustment and that they're fully engaged in their life. I would say, and I touched on this earlier, it's because grief is, this emotional vertigo that we get, thrust into sometimes, where, the heart has been cracked open. As so many people talk about that pain as if, their heartbrokenness, it is that sort of somatic feeling that we have in our heart. Our heart is aching, and so the gift of that is a heart that's been opened, especially if you'd been living with it closed a little bit. It elevates your consciousness in a way to where you start experiencing other people from a higher state of consciousness. You see into the things that we don't necessarily see into in normal life. The grieving process, the loss, can be a significant end of normal kind of experience for somebody, where they're just kind of thrust out of normal. And so it causes them to ask those big life questions. Who am I? What do I want? What is my life going to be about on the other side of this grief? And when we ask those big questions with sincerity, and sometimes with help and listening to our answers, the transformation that can take place in your life is, it's just a beautiful thing to see, where people really open up into a life that they never thought that they would be living.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, Carrie, wow, it's been a pretty awesome little journey here for the last hour. We've covered a lot of amazing ground, and I want to thank you so much for being here. Is there anything that you'd like to add at the end here, just to close us out for the day?
Sure. I would just say, if you are aware that you are dealing with loss, and so many of us are these days, David, aren't we? Loss of, our livelihoods for some people, loss of, our marriages, all kinds of things. If you're aware that you are struggling with loss, just realize that you don't have to suck it up and go through this by yourself.
Absolutely.
There are so many ways to receive support, to receive guidance that can help you navigate through this process so that the life that you're creating on the other side, you're going through a huge transition. So it's like, so that the way that you're setting yourself up for your future is taking into account your greatest potential. Yeah, you can sort of, muddle your way through it, and it can be hard to do it that way. I would just say, if you know that you're struggling with this, find some way of being supported, whether it's through a coach, through a therapist, through a group, through, supportive friends who know how to be there for you. Don't go through this alone.
Yeah. And I would just say, I want to add, and don't be afraid to contact either Carrie or myself.
Yeah.
Either one of us will be more than happy to help you with this. And Carrie is the expert on grief. I'm a life mastery coach. I have some information on that, but yeah, don't be afraid to ask for help. And Ajar, you're welcome. I'm glad you could be here, and so glad that you joined us. Well, thank you again, Carrie. It's been an awesome experience. I'm just so glad that we were able to do this today. And I know that the information that we have collected here, it's going to live on because it's going to be recorded and it's going to be on my website. I'll share that in a minute. So with all of you who are watching either in person or on the recording, I just want to say I hope you enjoyed this presentation. For those of you who are live, in a few hours, you're going to receive an email with a link to a feedback page. My request is that you take some time to actually go to that page and write a review of this episode, because every single review helps us to improve our show and get more information out there. And if we can get 5-star reviews, great. But honestly, share from your heart, whatever that might be. And then the other thing is, I want to remind you that all recordings are on my website at lifemasterytv.com. That's life-mastery-tv.com. And this one will be up there probably later this afternoon, so you can go back and watch it then if you like. And please share it with your friends. Finally, I want to remind everybody to practice the Life Mastery mantra every single day. It's a great thing for you to wake up and start your day with this. It goes like this. I gratefully forgive the imperfect being I have been in the past. I gratefully accept the magnificent being I am right now. I gratefully welcome the evolved being I am becoming in each new moment. So until we meet again, I am David McLeod, your Life Mastery Coach, wishing you love, light, and blessings on your continuing journey. Until we meet again, bye-bye.
Thank you, David. Bye-bye.